Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre gave some clear answers today about two potential Conservative policies. Last week, the Conservatives voted in favour of a Bloc Québécois bill that would increase old age security payments. And today, Poilievre said that vote signaled Conservatives believe seniors deserve more money in their pockets, but his party would look into other ways to ensure that happens.
For example, by axing the carbon tax and lowering income tax, you can allow seniors to keep more of their pension and their retirement income and make those dollars go further. So as we develop our platform, we will bring forward a low-tax plan that allows seniors to have more powerful pensions and to bring home the affordable prices that will allow them to have a dignified retirement.
Poilievre also clarified where he stands on involuntary treatment for people with addictions.
I believe for children and for prisoners who are behind bars, there should be mandatory drug treatment when they are found to be incapable of making decisions for themselves. For adults, again, I'm still doing a lot of research on how that would work.
Okay, we're going to dig into those potential policies of a potential Conservative government with the Power Panel. Satya Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. And here with me in studio, Carleen Varayan is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. It's good to see you all. Satya, let's start if we can with the involuntary treatment answer from Mr. Poilievre. For minors and for people who are incarcerated, he's clear, he thinks this is the policy choice. Making up his mind for adults, for a guy who professes freedom, forced medical treatment, I can understand why he'd get there. The treatment capacity, though, is a challenge here, right? There is not enough people to do it, even if you force them to go into it. What do you make of where he is and what needs to happen for it to work?
Well, it's a major issue, obviously, at the federal level, which is why Mr. Poilievre is talking about it. It's a major issue at the provincial level, just in terms of capacity for care deliveries. So like you said, whether it's voluntary or involuntary care, and people can have different points of view on the merits of involuntary care or not. But the fact is, as you say, those supports, those capacities, those places for people to go are just not available. And a colleague said to me a couple of days ago, and I thought it was probably one of the most astute things I've heard on this file, which is one that, coming from BC, have been close to for a long time, talked about it a lot in Tuesday's BC Leaders debate. But, one of the things that a colleague said to me was around politicians believe in the four pillars, right? That's the four pillars of harm reduction, which is prevention, and enforcement and treatment, and again, just, the harm reduction side of things. But they seem to only want to deal with them one pillar at a time. So we go from a place where politicians are talking about and touting the importance of things like safe supply, of decriminalization, of destigmatization. Right. That doesn't seem to help. So then all of a sudden, boom, we're into involuntary treatment and more research on whether voluntary or involuntary is important. Right. These things only work if they're working together in conjunction. If they're all working together at once, you can't do one and then the other and then the other. So it's interesting to hear what Mr. Poilievre said. He clearly wants to do more research. I would have liked to have heard him talk about, the importance as well of the other three pillars. Yeah,
it's like building a table with one leg, right? It's not going to stand up very well. But James, the staffing challenges are there. Mr. Poilievre says he's making up his mind on what to do with adults. Now, he's opposed vaccine mandates, and I don't know if this fits into the continuum of that sort of medical decision, or what do you think he's weighing there? Where do you think he might go?
I don't know. I mean, that's for him to articulate, that you impose as a contradiction, but I don't know. I think the line between adults and children is very clear and very succinct. And I also think the line between those who are incarcerated and those who are not is succinct, because when people are in the care of the government has a responsibility to make sure that they are being cared for. I mean, there's an obligation there. But look, I think it's good that we've sort of loosened the lid on the substance of this conversation, because when it comes to addiction issues, right, there's detox, and then there's lifelong recovery, and in the middle there's this thing called treatment. And often we talk about treatment as though it's kind of, you go somewhere for a week or two, like you're rehabbing a twisted ankle, and you kind of come out of it and you're okay. Now this is complicated. There are dozens and dozens of reasons of why people become and fall into the disease of addiction, and there needs to be a multitude of ways in which people come out of it. And so if government is going to be involved in the treatment umbrella, treatment is a very broad umbrella about what that constitutes. Because what might work for you may not work for me, may not work for my neighbor. And so, and different substances, different challenges. For some people, there's underlying trauma. For some people, there's a biological predisposition to addiction. And like, these are very complicated medical matters. It's good that we're starting down the road of conversation, maybe on the knife's edge of some of the more complicated and emotional stuff about sort of forced treatment. But at least we're getting the ball rolling here about people having a more mature conversation about this, as opposed to just sloganeering. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, my mom worked in this field. She was a nurse who did a lot of work in addictions. And so, Andrew, like you could always see the challenges, but also the shortages. And this is an enormous thing, right? There's a lot of money going from the federal government into the health coffers under these old agreements. They're dealing with a bunch of things, and this isn't necessarily on the short list, right? Because you've got acute emergency room challenges, family doctor challenges. This, if we're going to deal with this, there needs to be treatment expansion as well in the system.
Well, and certainly there are, as James has pointed out, there are a number of these issues that collide in a person's life. It's not like they decide to just go out and become a drug addict. There are issues around homelessness, there's issues around employment security, there's issues around family violence. There are a number of issues that impact this. So looking at it in isolation, and I think that's kind of what Shashi's point is that there's a problem to that. It's not just within the continuum of how you deal with the drug issues and the enforcement issues, but what are you doing generally in terms of just the overall health of the community? And that's something that I think governments have a really hard time getting involved in, because you go too much one way, it looks like you're being soft on this, you go too much the other way, and all of a sudden you're into all sorts of challenges, like I think Pierre Poilievre has found out, about stepping in and forcing, taking away the rights of individuals. So it is a complicated space, and it's complicated also, of course, by Canadian jurisdiction. And
Yes.
I think that we need to understand the role that not only provinces but municipalities play within this.
But Carleen, to sort of go back to Shachi's point, right? The involuntary treatment is one thing, safe supply is another. There are different ways of dealing with this. One is becoming more and more politically unacceptable, certainly as we're seeing, but maybe it is part in a smaller way in the solution. How do you balance this, right? Because as I said, it's so complicated, and it really is life and death.
Well, it is life and death, and in fact, that is one of the problems that I think you will start to see highlighted about involuntary treatment by those who come from the addiction treatment space and various expert authorities like CAMH and the Mental Health Commission, is that addiction is not, to use James's comparison, it's not a broken leg that you heal from and then you move on. It's in the DSM-5 as a chronic disease, a chronic relapsing disease. And often what you see with involuntary treatment that is restricted to a short term, so perhaps detox and then some initial maintenance treatment, and then the individual is released, is that because of the relapsing nature of the disease, people, when they do relapse, their tolerance is reduced, they end up overdosing, and you actually see increased deaths as a result. So it can be very dangerous if not done right. And from what we've heard so far, the program isn't really fleshed out that much. The other issue, or the other area that I think we're going to encounter a little bit of resistance, maybe a lot of resistance, is if you're talking about mandatory treatment, you're probably going to run into some opposition from Indigenous communities in Canada. This is a group of people who are disproportionately impacted by the diseases of addiction. It's also people who have a very complicated relationship with forced healthcare treatment in this country over the last couple hundred years. All of this to say, I don't think this sounds like something that's been entirely thought through by Pierre Poilievre. I see a lot of potential bumps in the road, and that's not even getting into the capacity issues. Our hospitals already are overflowing. People can't find family doctors, and we're suddenly talking about adding a whole new layer of forced treatment into this. It needs a bit of work.
Yeah, well, and look, it's not just Mr. Poilievre, Blaine Higgs, even David Eby, and John Russ said it's becoming more and more of an issue, certainly throughout these provincial elections, as one of the solutions that's being put on the table. Shachi, the other bit of clarity we got from Mr. Poilievre today, after their vote on the OAS from the Bloc last week, it's $3 billion a year and growing from here. We tried for days to say, does your vote in favor of this mean it's actually party policy? And we didn't get the answer until today. when he basically said, no, it isn't. They're going to look, they wanted to signal that seniors deserve more buying power, and they're looking at, axing the tax and cutting income tax. So what do we make of that we finally have this clarity after, days of looking for the answer?
Well, this is Pierre Poilievre doing his best impression of one of the flying Walendas, I think. It's like walk that tightrope very, very carefully. In Quebec, as we all know, the Conservatives are far back from the bloc. They're in a race for a distant second place with the Liberals, and certainly don't want to be in a situation now, especially when national federal election campaigns are very much niche campaigns, region to region and province to province, to have to not only be under attack from the Bloc, but also from the Liberals saying, well, why did you vote against this expansion? Why did you vote against the Bloc's proposal on this? So, it pulls the lever that needs to be pulled and provides the cover that Poilievre and the Conservatives will need in Quebec to sort of take that pressure or that tension away and have to take him off the defensive on that front, while also not having to defend himself in places like Saskatchewan, Alberta, and other places that are much more hawkish around government spending, saying, this is not a blanket policy. We're going to fix this later, but for now, we're indicating that we want seniors to have, a more comfortable situation.
But, James, they watch the news in Quebec, right? And they're going to know that he said, yeah, we voted for it, but we have no intention of doing it, right? So does it not potentially create another challenge there? I don't know.
Yeah, I think those are your words, not his. But I think.
Well, no, he said they're not going to increase the OAS. He said they're going to look at tax cuts, right?
Yeah, but we'll see. But in part because, look, we don't know if the election is going to be in 30 days. We don't know if it's going to be in 3 months or 6 months or, frankly, in another 12 months. To make a commitment, absolutely, that has a long tail in terms of its economic consequence and hit to the fiscal framework in the fall of 2004, then you form government in 2005 and you bring in your first budget in 2025, and then you bring in your budget in 2026 for an economic impact that'll be foreseen for the next 10 years, is not fiscally responsible. So to send a signal that if it were today, if this was going to happen today, this is how you would vote. However, we reserve the right to have more specificity when the campaign happens and then when we form government. I think that's totally reasonable, because to hamstring a government or any political party 3 years ahead of the impact time of when a policy would be put in place does a disservice to the substance of the matter, because you actually want governments and opposition parties who are vying for governments to be able to have real numbers in real time, as opposed to playing this sort of, well, but you said then and we said then. No, how about right now, in the 30 days before the election, for the next budget, 3 months after the election, this is what we will do, and if we don't, then throw us out of office. It's important to have a context of time frame of when promises are made. So, I'm not trying to create an out here for Pierre, but I do think it's important that promises and rhetoric in 2024 for policies that have real consequence in 2026 and beyond, I think should be taken with a grain of salt.
Okay, so Andrew, as someone who's done budgets, how do you view it then? Because the answer was we're going to come forward with taxes is sort of the solution, the definite bit of clarity we got to create more powerful pensions, but didn't firmly commit to this even though they voted for it. So how do you view the position on this?
Opposition parties have this great luxury of being able to be inconsistent. It is their single greatest superpower that they can get away with, and it causes government ministers to pull their hairs out, because you can't, in government, say, well, I'm voting for this, but I'm not putting it into my budget, or it's in my budget, but we're not going to implement it. You actually have to carry through. Opposition parties have no such constraints on them. And that's what you're seeing here, is that they're saying, well, this isn't the right mechanism, we're sympathetic to the cause, we'll find a different way to do it. And frankly, I think they'll get away with it. Because at the end of this, when there's an election, seniors will look and go, will I be better off in 4 years with a Conservative government than I am with a Liberal government or some propped up thing by the Bloc? And that's, I think, really kind of where we're at. Opposition parties will do that, right? I mean, they're going to vote against budgets that have all sorts of measures in it. They're going to continue. They're going to vote for measures that they don't have any intention of bringing in. I don't think that there's a lot of political jeopardy here, but one of the things that was interesting about today's approach by the Conservative leader is that it starts to deal with that issue of sounding like a government in waiting. This was a much different kind of rhetorical tone than we've seen from the Conservatives in some time. And so the hedging on there may be constraints around what we do on The drug policy, you know what, this isn't the right solution on seniors, but we're sympathetic to it. That all of a sudden is a very different side of the Conservatives than what we've seen, which has been the three-word slogans over the last 16, 18 months.
That's a good point. Just to let people know, pharmacare has just passed through third reading in the Senate about 4 minutes ago. So that could restart some political calendars. Hello, NDP. Carlene, what are your thoughts on what we learned or didn't learn about OAS today?
Well, my biggest observation from Pierre Poilievre's policy statements on both of these topics, drug treatment and OAS, was really the sudden shift to something a little bit more thoughtful, constructive, considered than a simple axe the tax, crimes up, times up, time for a carbon tax election. That is interesting to me, and I don't know, certainly, I'm not on the inside of the Conservative strategy room, but I don't know if that was a strategic decision or if it just is reflecting a natural evolution, but it is noted. I think that one of the privileges of being in opposition is being able to get away with these kinds of things. I think this was an easy yes for the Conservatives to support it. I do not think that they will bear any significant consequences politically if they ultimately choose not to implement that kind of a policy if they do form a government, or keep it if it becomes implemented before they form a government. But if they choose to, I also think it could be an interesting move. I mean, seniors are a demographic where support for the Conservative Party is a little bit soft. It might help shore that support up. And, you know, one of those three-word slogans that the Conservatives use so effectively right now is fix the budget. It's not balance the budget. And that is, I think, something that is interesting, right? He's never talked about balancing the budget. Fix it can mean whatever you want.
That could be a stylistic and rhythmic choice, right? Because everything has that sort of,
Well,
pace to it, right? Like it rolls off the tongue better.